I still belong to the community, the university. So yeah, maybe I still am. But I submitted my thesis a couple of weeks ago. So I'm in that transition, I guess. My thesis, the short answer would be political philosophy, ethics, and the long answer would be really long for me to say it. So like the in between would be structural injustice, colonialism, and the moral implications of innocently benefiting from injustice. That's like the broad summary.
Yeah. So basically the idea of I personally am innocent, but bad things have been done. And so how do we resolve that? Something like that?
Something as in someone that I don't know did something really bad that I didn't agree to, but those actions benefit me. So even though I didn't do anything wrong, I still have a responsibility to do something about it.
Yeah, awesome. And so Renee is going to be telling us more about that. But Renee, before that, why don't you tell us more about you? So what are the important questions to ask? We know your name, we know what you're doing. So I want to know your favorite color and what your name would be if you were a pirate. Those are the
My name would be if I were a what?
A pirate. If you decided to become a pirate today, what would your scary name be?
Dude, these are really random questions. You put them in a spot. Well, I mean, things about me that are not, professional. I would say that I am Mexican, probably. That is something important about me. I've been all over the place. I did my MA in England. I also studied in France and before coming here. I have a son now. He's 9 weeks old, and you could see him before. He's not on the screen now. I am currently unemployed as well, but I prefer to say that I am a graduate researcher. It's the same, but sounds fancier. And my favorite color, I don't know. Honestly, and I swear this is honest, the only thing that comes to my mind at this point is mustard. And the reason for that is that when you have a baby, you actually monitor the color of their poo. And if it's yellowish, it means they are healthy and strong. So at this point, is whenever I see that kind of yellow, I see like, okay, everything's good, everything is normal. So sorry, that is my answer at this point.
No, fair enough.
And I haven't really thought about, sorry, Helen, about my pirate name. I would say something in Spanish, something to sound powerful and Hispanic, like Barbarossa or something like that, like in Pirates of the Caribbean or something. So
Yeah. Fair enough. Very nice. Awesome. Well, now that we know who you are and kind of, what you're going to be talking about slightly, would you like to take it away?
Would I like to say to take the what, sorry?
Take it away.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. At this point, what you should be seeing is just a blank slide. Is that what you see?
It is indeed.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to start by speaking a bit or recounting or making reference to some Greek mythology. In specific, I wanted to speak about the myth of this guy called Prometheus. He was a titan, some sort of demigod, right? And this myth tells this story about Zeus, the king of the Olympian gods. And he had decided to take fire from humans because he wanted to control them more easily. But this guy, Prometheus, thought that was unfair and he was not gonna take it. So he climbed up to Mount Olympus and he stole fire from the gods, and he brought it down to humans. And with fire, humans could, stay warm, cook, build tools, etc. They could be independent. So in this myth, fire symbolized knowledge. It symbolized power. And yes, there are many awesome things we can do with power. But what really makes this myth interesting is that Prometheus overlooked what humans could do with this kind of power. Humans built not only tools, but also weapons. They use it not only to stay warm, but also to kill each other. And, I think human history is filled with these contradictions, with the tensions between the good we can make and the destruction we can cause. Think about issues like, technology, war, science, and even climate change, right? It all comes down to what are you doing with power? I don't think any other topic has been studied more extensively. From Aristotle and Plato to, Seneca, Siddhartha, Nietzsche, Marx, Foucault, they all have, different definitions, different assessments, but they all address the topic. It is a big deal. So I also studied the topic a bit, and I am in no way suggesting that I belong on that list, but I just submitted a thesis about the structural injustice and also moral responsibility within post-colonial societies. I study colonialism as historical injustice, and as I said, its implications for us now in the present day. And I think colonialism is a great sample to speak about power. Colonialism is generally defined as a relationship of domination between an indigenous majority and a minority of foreign invaders. And even when each imperialist country had a particular relationship with its colonies, it's general agreement that this domination was unjust. In most cases, when the colonizers conquered indigenous people, they harmed them, discrimination, physical harm, exploitation. In my thesis, I analyzed Mexico and its case, but actually I think most cases of colonialism share enough similarities to make this theoretical framework useful. I have shared this material with people from other nations like Sri Lanka, Philippines, Malaysia, etc., and they all confirm the presence or the existence of this kind of structural injustice in their country. So maybe you can think whether or how these principles apply to your own country. So let me tell you a bit about the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. By the time the Spaniards arrived to the land we now call Mexico, led by this guy called Hernán Cortés, that was in 1590, they found an advanced civilization. While the population of France at that time was around 20 million, and Spain and the UK had around 6 million each, this empire has 25 million people. The capital city alone had around 250,000 people. That was bigger than, Paris at that time, and almost twice the biggest city of Spain at that time. But this empire was not only populous, but also prosperous. People, when they arrived, people were marveled at the technological level of their agriculture with their art and their architecture as well. Actually, the Aztec astronomy was years ahead of anything you could find in Europe at that time. But according to the Aztec legends, Quetzalcoatl, the great god, was once deceived by other gods, and in shame he retired into exile, not without promising that he would return at the termination of the fifth sun. So when the Emperor Moctezuma learned about these light-skinned strangers who arrived from the east in towers or small mountains floating on the sea, he feared that this god Quetzalcoatl had returned to put an end to his empire. So since the Spaniards could be representatives of a god, they were greeted in accordance to all religious rituals, and they were welcomed by the emperor. On the first meeting, Moctezuma and his guard waited for them as they dismounted from their horses, and they faced each other. Some accounts recorded Moctezuma saying, "Oh, our Lord, be doubly welcome on your arrival in this land. You have come to sit on your seat of authority, which I have kept a while for you. For I am not just dreaming, not just sleepwalking, not just seeing it in my sleep. I am not just dreaming that I have seen you. I have looked upon your face." All this welcoming paraphernalia from the Aztecs only fueled this Spaniards' greed. And one account recorded Cortés saying, "I and my companions suffer from a disease of the heart, which can be cured only with gold." So when they went to a war, the Spanish had actually psychological advantage, right? This was the first time native people were seeing a horse. So this image of a man on horseback scared them. In fact, they thought man and horse were a two-headed creature. Also, the Spanish had guns and cannons, and although these were actually quite not accurate at that point, they were still very loud and frightening. Still, Aztecs were not a really easy prey. What they did is that they destroyed causeways to the city to neutralize the Spanish cavalry advantage. And they were strong warriors as well, greatly skilled, use slings, crossbow. They had spears and darts that could penetrate armors and kill. And as a result of this fearless defense, the Spanish had to, conquer the city street by street, very slowly. But eventually the city fell. Despite of its horrors, war was not the hardest part for the indigenous population. After the conquest, to protect their interests, Spaniards let race determine one's status in the country. For the Spanish, their superiority was proven by their civilizing mission, and they argued, and this is true, that the atmosphere in this new world caused individuals to be physically, mentally, and also morally inferior. So soon, a rigid racial hierarchical structure was established, and any possibility of equality between Europeans and indigenous people disappeared. This structure developed into a sophisticated, complex, and even institutional arrangement, the caste system. This was a hierarchical ordering of racial groups according to the proportion of Spanish blood. This system assessed the character and the quality of people according to their race, ethnicity, and their skin color. Initially this system distinguished between 5 to 7 categories, but there's record of 16 or even 40 different castas. And historians think that this system achieved its institutional form by the mid-17th century, more or less. And it had an impact on every aspect of social life, including economics and taxation. 300 years later, Mexico gained its independence, and this caste system was officially abolished. But I argue that it continued to be central, not only in the history of the country, but on its present day. In the thesis, I analyzed data from the intergenerational social mobility module of the 2016 National Home Survey. This survey explored the characteristics of the Mexican household, including education and employment. But interestingly, this particular model also asks questions about ethnicity and skin color. So when I cross variables of skin color and education level, this is what I found. You can see it on the plot. The education level is higher as it gets closer to the white end of the spectrum. The correlation is almost progressive. A brown-skinned Mexican could average 7.2 years of education and a white one 11.2. That's almost 50% more. So you see, willingly or not, the colonizers set in place a hierarchical structure that evolved into discriminatory cultural conventions. And in many cases, ethnic origin, race, and skin color are the criteria that empower or discourage the outlooks of the lives of people living within that unfair structure. In this unfair structure, some are more likely to get, better education, a higher salary, a better job, just because they happen to fit better into the categories that the colonizers use as standards to distribute power and privilege. So I hope that by now you see that history matters. What happened in the past has implications in the present. And as I said before, this specific case is just one example, but you can also consider Australia. Briefly, 230 years ago, more or less, Europeans came to the land we now call Australia, and they brought with them, amongst other things, of course, dispossession, disease, and death. But it didn't stop there. There's ongoing disadvantage. For instance, 19% of Aboriginal Australians live in poverty compared to only 12% of all other Australians. Life expectancy for Indigenous Australians are 71 and 75, but 80 and 83 for all other Australians. Or did you know that Indigenous Australia, it's about 3% of the whole population, but still they make up to 28% of the prison's population? 4.7% of all Indigenous men are in jail, compared to only 0.3% of all non-Indigenous men. This means that Indigenous men are 15 times more likely to be incarcerated. And then if you are female, that is worse, that's 22 times more likely. Also, Aboriginal youth suicide rate is 5 times higher than all non-Indigenous peoples in the country. You see, these are just 2 examples, right? But history matters. It has implications in the present. And honestly, race is only one of the axes of oppression. There's also sex, class, disabilities, amongst other. So you see, whether you want it or not, chances are you are in a position of power. So the question really is not what would you do if you were given power, but what you are doing now with the power you already have. For my research, I engaged with philosophers and also activists and explored in what ways could people benefiting from a structural injustice respond to this privilege. And of course, I don't have time here to go over all the details of my findings, but I can mention some of them briefly. So basically, theory and praxis suggest that there are two things that privileged people or the powerful can do to put things back in right balance, offset and mingle. You know, for the idea of offsetting to make sense, we need to understand privilege as an undeserved advantage systematically conferred in virtue of membership to a particular group. What this means is that one can be a beneficiary of a certain harm without being involved in its causation. So because you don't cause it, you cannot avoid receiving it. What you can do is neutralize this privilege that you get and the harm it does to others. So how? For instance, calling out racist comments and standing in solidarity with oppressed groups. In other words, you gotta use the power you have for the benefit of others. The other thing innocent beneficiaries of structural injustice can do is interact with the rest of the people in the structure, especially with those that are in a different position in the social hierarchy. I chose mingling here to emphasize the social component of this idea. The point here is that these interactions are valuable and they teach different groups about each other. Interaction helps not because friendship is a magical thing that would transform our societies, but because during these interactions, people get to know each other, their experiences and their struggles, as well as their privilege and their disadvantages. You know, as a political theorist, I have done my part. My thesis has been submitted and my supervisors seem to be quite pleased with it. But I think there are some questions that we still need to answer. First of all, how do we know that these apparent solutions actually work? And even if they do, how do we get people to comply? Again, as a political theorist, there are only a few things I could say to answer these questions. In my thesis, I have made some recommendations, of course, but I don't expect them to change much, to be honest. It has rarely been the lack of answers what prevents people from acting. It's usually selfishness what prevents change. It's usually people's worldview. You know, when I face these kind of conundrums in my research, is when I feel blessed that I am a Christian. And I gotta say something here. For many people, Christianity may be only a dogma or a hobby, something completely irrelevant to the most pressing issues of our time. For other people, Christianity is actually part of the problem, right? For instance, according to some colonizers, it was the Christian faith what justified their actions. But I am convinced that both of these interpretations are a mistake. I think at its heart, Christianity is a worldview, one that speaks to every aspect of our lives, one that does not justify discrimination, but on the contrary, it condemns it. See, if Jesus was in fact God, then his death and resurrection transforms every single aspect of our lives, including how we use power. If he was God, his example is the only thing that is relevant. So did Jesus ever say anything that speaks to the issues we have been discussing today? Did he ever say something about power, colonialism, or structural injustice? Look at the events recorded in Matthew 20, where we see two worldviews clash regarding how do we understand power. Isaac, could you help me reading this, please?
I certainly could. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Thank you. So as you can see here, Jesus' idea of power is completely different. For him, power is about service, not privilege. In his kingdom, power is serving people. If you ask me, this is surprisingly similar to the idea of offsetting. It's making sure your privilege is used to help others. But does Jesus say anything about mingling? Well, almost or kind of. Look at what he says. It would be the defining characteristics of his people. Maybe for this one, I can have Lincoln reading from John 13 and Sarah from John 15, and maybe Sarah Pierce. I think there are two Sarahs.
Okay. John 13. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
And John 15, verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends.
Thank you, guys. So you see, Christianity does not only present a new conception of power, it also gives you a reason to adopt it. Someone so much greater than you had already used his power to serve you. This is what theologians call grace. And it's what makes Christianity different to every other religion out there. Christians do not obey God to be good people or to earn heaven. They follow God in response to the love God has already showed them. Unlimited, totally undeserved love. So what does this mean? How is this relevant for you guys? Well, of course, it depends on the kind of relationship you have with Christ. If you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, then learning about colonialism, race, and how these affect power dynamics around you is just another reason to just obey him. It is a call to be aware of this inequality and actively fight it. For example, I have been tutoring subjects in the Faculty of Arts for 3 years now. Probably around 30 tuts, I should say. Do you know what I see every single time? The classroom divided by nationality and race. Australians sitting with Australians, international students with international students. And look, there are many factors that explain this. You speak different languages, you don't have the same sense of humor, etc., etc. So I get that. But you know, international students are here on their own, without their families. Some of them struggle with speaking English, or they are even facing financial hardship. Do you see this power imbalance there? I think it's really obvious. So how hard it is for you to go and actually sit with them, speak with them? How hard it is for you to introduce them to your friends? How hard it is for you to invite them to have lunch with your family? It's gonna be awkward, maybe. But would you follow Jesus in using your own power to serve others? Would you love them because he loved you? You know, and maybe some of you aren't Christians, so maybe you don't really care about Jesus's opinion at this point. And I think that's fair. You know, there are many big questions out there. Some are very abstract and existential, you may say, you know, what is life? What's my purpose? And some others are more practical, but not less personal, you know, gender, race, climate change, other social justice issues. I need to say, you know, I am not a Christian because I ignore all of these questions, but because I engage with all of them, and I find in Christianity the most coherent worldview. In this case, Jesus' teachings happen to overlap with what experts are saying, right? But he said it 2,000 years before. And I mean, honestly, we have to admit as well that there are many other issues in which Jesus completely disagrees with the mainstream ideas of our world. But still, do you find at least slightly interesting that the words of this first century Middle Eastern man continue to speak so relevantly to the issues we face today? Well, things get a bit more interesting when you learn that this man claimed to be God and that his followers claim that he raised from the dead. So maybe it is worth exploring the veracity and consistency of his teachings and his words. You know, if it's all false, under scrutiny, it will all fall apart very quickly. But if he happens to be God, if you research, he happens to be God, then listening to his words is the most important thing you can do with your life. And that's all for me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Renee. That was